So I have a question for the kids in here today. So with regards to school tomorrow, you guys have school tomorrow? No. Why not? Martin Luther King Day. So, do you know why we should take off a day of school to honor Martin Luther King? Yes.
He was a good man.
He was a good man. He was a great man. And it's worth taking a day off from school to think about all the wonderful things that he was able to accomplish. Now, do you know how his story ended? Yes.
Got shot.
He was sadly shot. Yes, he was. But is that the end of his story? Maybe. Maybe. I think you're onto something. Okay, you know, one thing to think about, one way to think about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he led a life where he took on the biggest bullies. Not only on the block, not only in the schoolyard, but Dr. King took on the biggest bullies in the world. In fact, he took on the biggest bullies in the world, and nonviolence was his method. And that can be pretty scary. But the thing about it is, King was not afraid. In fact, he said that the consequences for my personal life are not important. It is the triumph of the cause that is important. So he was not afraid, even though the path he chose was really scary. He was not afraid because he gave himself to something bigger than himself. And even more than any of the other ways that he showed us that in conquering fear, freedom is won. So I want to tell you, young and old alike, because of that, talking about King's life and death is not easy. When it becomes easy, you'll know that his dream has either been accomplished or stolen. And it has not been accomplished. So we're going to look at some things that are hard to look at right now. We're going to look at the balcony of the Lorraine Motel on April 4th, 1968. It was a Thursday. And the late Dr. King's body has been taken away. However, for his close friends returning from the hospital, there is a grim reminder of his presence having been there. There's a pool of blood on the balcony floor. So Jesse Jackson approaches, and he sees the pool of blood and kneels down before the puddle. He places both of his hands, palm downward, into the blood of his friend. And then he stands and wipes the front of his turtleneck shirt with his hands, taking the blood of Martin onto himself. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered as he was about to join the efforts of striking garbage workers in Memphis. It was a somewhat unplanned initial step on what was to be the most ambitious endeavor of King's career, the Poor People's Campaign. This effort was envisioned to culminate in a multiracial multitude of the poor descending on Washington, D.C., until Congress enacted a Poor People's Bill of Rights, which would have included a massive government jobs program. So having learned a little bit about the levers of power in our nation, while he fought for desegregation and equal rights, and then again while he spoke out against the war in Vietnam, Dr. King was determined to hit at the root of exploitation in the Poor People's Campaign. And this carried him well beyond the field of race politics and into the much more dangerous field of economics. See, Dr. King understood that racism is just one of the tools that greedy people in power use to stay in power. Previously, King was trying to change the way people in and out of power thought about race. What he was about to do was change the way people in and out of power thought about power. And I don't know that he was killed for that attempt, but I do know that he was not killed until he attempted it. And it is now in serious question as to who and how many were involved in bringing about the death of the great man. In fact, in 1999, a civil action lawsuit in Memphis, Tennessee found that King's assassination was a conspiracy involving the FBI, the CIA, the military, Memphis police, and the mafia. Now, a civil suit has less stringent requirements for evidence than a criminal suit. That being said, no less than 70 witnesses testified in the proceedings. The jury comprised of 6 black Americans and 6 white Americans. It convened for but an hour before rendering the verdict. So I'm going to repeat this because I think it's hard to hear. An American court of law determined that elements of the local police, the FBI, the CIA, and our armed forces conspired with the mafia to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr. That's scary. The day before his assassination, King told an audience that has subsequently grown to include the whole world. I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. That was the night before his murder. And it's likely my imagination, but when I watch him say that, it feels anyway like he knew what was coming. That's pure speculation on my part. And yet, if he did, he remained unbowed. What a man. For we know what comes next. He says, longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know that tonight, we, as a people, will get to the promised land.
Now that he is safely dead, let us praise him, build monuments to his glory, sing hosannas to his name. Dead men make such convenient heroes they cannot rise, to challenge the images we would fashion from their lives. And besides, it is easier to build monuments than to make a better world. So now that he is safely dead, we, with ease consciousness, will teach our children that he was a great man, knowing that the cause for which he lived is still a cause, and the dream for which he died is still a dream, a dead man's dream.
Still a dream. Yes. A dead man's dream. I don't know. You see, I think King was wrong in this respect. I think that if there is a place to get to, that he will get there with us. He was murdered, but he was not ended. And to keep him alive, we must allow his monuments to call us out, to convict us, and to inspire us. And then we will see that his action and character lives on in his disciples and in the path upon which he set this nation. You see, when Reverend Jackson knelt down and dipped his palms into King's blood, he was symbolically taking onto himself the properties of his friend. But he wasn't just taking them onto himself alone. Because we see it, we've seen pictures of it in the past, or we see it in our mind's eye even today. Because we see Jesse dipping his hands into the blood of his friend, we understand its history and significance. We know that the properties of Martin, in transferring to Jesse, have also transferred to us. And these properties pave the way for the winding road to our work and our dismay with regard to questions of immigration, prisons, racism, trade, economics, food, and injustice anywhere. The blood reminds us that we continue, all of us, regardless of our heritage, skin color, or economic status, to participate to varying degrees in a vast system of repression and exploitation that pollutes our character by a lack of awareness that constitutes a subconscious denial at the least. And in denial, no freedom is allowed. In denial, we are not free. Denial speaks of fear, and fear is the emotion of captivity. It is only when we are able to overcome our fears, as Dr. King did, which ultimately and finally means overcoming our fear of death, even in its many smaller disguises. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of losing lovers or friends, or comfort, fear of losing employment or ability or esteem. For fear is death in degrees. And so it is not only when we are able to overcome, it is only when we are able to overcome our fears that we will be free. Martin Luther King Jr. was free. He may have won for himself and his brothers and sisters concrete political freedoms in the South. But to do so, he had to conquer his fear first. First, he had to find that freedom on display so matter-of-factly when he said the consequences for my personal life are not important. It is the triumph of the cause that is important. That is why King is able to live in us beyond the death of his body. This is the power in the blood of that his protege smeared on his shirt and took onto his hands. And Jesse still has blood on his hands. And the blood is still on our hands. The good news is that there are things we can do with that. For on the one hand, the blood reminds us of our transgressions, of our culpability in these systems. And on the other hand, it's the transferred properties of hope and heroism, of faith in humankind, and a reminder of fallibility, forgiveness, and true power. The life and work of Martin Luther King. It is our heritage. And if we do not want it, that blood becomes only an indictment. And yet if we accept it, if you let it seep into your imagination, into your heart, that blood becomes not only an indictment, but it also becomes a force in our own veins, a meaning in our own life. For that is the blood in which the murdered prophet still lives. And we are worthy of it. And we are guilty of it. As worthy and as guilty as the prophet himself. So if we accept it, if we accept that blood, if we accept this story, if we face our fears and move out of denial, if we own our responsibilities, possibilities, and obligations to justice, if we face our fear and find freedom, then we can hold up our own bloody hands and see death and life and guilt and hope. Change these from the posture of the convicted to the posture of conviction.
I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the south with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
What is your conviction? What cause will propel you to freedom for yourself and to work for freedom for your fellow human? Let the monument speak.